The hot streak continues as Eli Drinkwitz and Brandon Jones continue to stack offensive linemen. This time, one from Texas. Let's talk about him and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. We're going to talk today about the difference between statistical regression and actual regression. I think Marquis Johnson is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. Also, the college football playoff. I have to admit, the more I look at the 12-teamer, the more excited I get about it. But can we stop now? Pretty please. That's all I'm saying. Also, here's what else I'm saying. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager. If you're a small business, that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And some more exciting news adding to what I believe is going to be the highest ranked class in Mizzou football history in 2025. Missouri adding Texas offensive lineman Henry Fenuku to its class. A lot of really impressive offers and visitors. In fact, he visited Missouri and Ohio State this past weekend. He was a known take for the Georgia Bulldogs as well. So what more do you really need to know than that? And it seems like that's a particular phrase I've been using a lot lately. Missouri swimming in waters that, frankly, it's never found itself in before. Over and over again, it's not as though the Tigers are winning every single one of these battles, but they sure are winning their fair share. And just to be in so many of these battles with programs like Georgia and Ohio State, it's unbelievably impressive. Whatever's happening behind the scenes, and of course, Drinkwitz deserves the lion's share of the credit. Brandon Jones deserves a heaping helping of it as well for all of his efforts that led to one of the best rushing attacks in the country and in the SEC last year. So again, if you're swimming in these waters with these type of blue blood programs and winning on occasion, that's really all you need to know. So if there's any doubt that what is a three-star prospect someplace, Henry Fenuku, that is, I'm just going to look at the offers more often than not. But I'm also going to look at what other people are saying, especially outside of the Missouri sphere. Over at Rivals Nebraska, writer Tim Verghese, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, says, really like this pickup for Mizzou. Fenuku has elite footwork at 295 pounds, good striking power as well, moves ridiculously well in space. Another writer over at Rivals.com, Marshall Levinson. Fenuku is powerfully built, an interior prospect, primarily at the guard position in high school, likely at that same left guard position at the next level. Often deploys a strong first punch, utilizes leverage well, clears out running lanes, athletic space, quick on his feet. Fenuku is a great asset to pull and get to the second level. Seems to always have strong hand placement, never getting outside of the defender's frame. Strong finisher, and second level defenders getting cleared out of the play. So a lot to like there, obviously, for that young man. And frankly, the key here is, along with Jack Lang, a big-time prospect out of Missouri, the Tigers are in on a ton of other offensive linemen in this class as well. Again, you just start stacking them on top of each other. Eventually, you're going to wind up with some starters in the future. We know not all offensive linemen in particular, but of course all recruits in general, they're not all going to pan out. But the more often you get this type of talent, again, especially on the offensive line, there just aren't that many big men who are meant to grow into be 300 pounds, for example, especially long-armed ones that are athletic and can actually move a little bit. Those type of young men are in very short supply, and the fact that Missouri is getting in on more and more of them can only mean good things for the future. Now, of course, it can't all be good news on the recruiting trails, and Andrew Babalola from Overland Park, another offensive line prospect that Missouri was hot after. All indications are from multiple sources that he is likely headed to Stanford to be a Stanford Cardinal. So probably you can mark him off the list, though certainly Missouri isn't going to until that's official. But it seems much more likely guys like Lamont Rogers from Mesquite, Texas, another lineman, plus, of course, Michael Fasusi. Who knows at this point? He's a really highly regarded prospect, although it does seem like when Texas A&M really wants somebody in terms of money, think of Jimbo Fisher, not only in terms of the front end of the hire, but also getting rid of him on the back end as well. It seems like when Texas A&M really wants somebody, often they get him. So we'll see on Fasusi, but also Carius Kern, another player who was formerly committed to the University of Arkansas, is also on the market. He could be a Missouri lean as well, according to a lot of indications. He certainly, and from his own mouth, he was certainly impressed after his visit with the Tigers. So a lot of interesting things happening behind the scenes, including, Gabe DeArmond gave a future cast yesterday online on his message board for a couple guys as well. Not just linemen, but we're talking about a receiver and a safety as well. One, a former Notre Dame decommit. So if you want to check that out, definitely check out Gabe DeArmond's message board over there. We'll talk about that when hopefully those guys are indeed committed to the Tigers. So rather helpfully, I would say the SEC has released the television windows, the kickoff windows for the rest of the schedule for Missouri and the rest of the league. I certainly appreciate that. For example, I know now, as somebody traveling to the November game at South Carolina, that game's either going to be kicking off at 2:30 or 3:30 Central Time. So an afternoon window, of course. And in my opinion, hey, that's great for me as somebody who's traveling to the other Columbia. Nice time to be able to actually get there, take things in, but not maybe get back to wherever I'm staying too late, because I'm not sure if I'm going to be staying actually in Columbia proper or not. We shall see when I tie down those plans. But the bottom line for all of you, I think this is the most important thing to note here. All this information is easily searchable out there on the internet if there's any specific road games, for example, that you're interested in. But basically, since most of you are going to be attending Missouri home games, what you want to know is that the Auburn game, which is Missouri's homecoming, and Boston College, those are the only two early home games. In other words, they'll kick off between 11 a.m. and noon Columbia time. All the other games are either going to be afternoon or night windows, either between 2:30 and 3:30 or 6 and 7 p.m. The Oklahoma game, for instance, is a flex game, so it's either going to be in that afternoon window or it might be in the night window, depending on how the schedule plays out, depending on how marquee of a matchup that November tilt between the Sooners and the Tigers ends up being. So bottom line there, I like the move by the SEC to give us more of an idea a few months out, at least 3, 4, 5 months out on some of these games, to know, oh, hey, this is actually going to be an afternoon game. Even if it's off an hour here or there, that's not that big of a deal. But when you're trying to make travel plans, that sort of thing, whether it's just coming from Kansas City to Columbia or going to a road game across the country like I am trying to attempt this fall, either way, that's a nice thing to know. That hour or so difference, even the difference between, say, a 3:30 and a 7 o'clock kick, that kind of thing, is not that extreme of a difference. So I appreciate the SEC for that. And you know what? A few years ago, after Patrick Mahomes had his famous rookie season where he won the MVP and took the league by storm, there was a lot of talk about Patrick Mahomes' regression after that? Well, you're going to see some people talking about Marquis Johnson, Speedy Johnson, and his possible regression this coming season. Well, to me, whether you believe in that or not depends on exactly what you mean by the word regression. Let's talk about what I expect from Speedy Johnson this upcoming season and get into that bigger picture talk as well. But as a golfer, I've heard for years PXG say that nobody makes clubs like they do, period. Well, you know what? I think they're absolutely right. After Linnea Strum shot a final round 60 to come from 7 shots back to win the latest LPGA event, I think you got to be a believer. And I had got my hands on the PXG Black Ops driver, got fitted for one in PXG Kansas City. Man, just a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. Feels so unbelievably solid in your hands. Just can mash it, absolutely mash it, get the right amount of swing speed and forgiveness as well. And if you're thinking that these clubs are too expensive, well, they often cost less than the so-called leading brands. PXG has really made me a believer, and they'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City. It's 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club, and you'll get a dozen golf balls free. That's pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou. Limit 1 dozen golf balls per person. Promotion ends June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply. See store for details. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find the best professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the right tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And I'll just tell you from personal experience, when you find the right people that are right for your team, they'll actually understand what you're wanting to accomplish. They're not simply there for a paycheck. They'll really be a valued member of the team. And LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn is going to help you find exactly those types of professionals, the types that you cannot find anywhere else. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier, and that's exactly what you need. You're trying to wear so many hats, you can't possibly do all of the searching for candidates as well. So instead, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. To be honest, and it really doesn't totally matter, but I don't completely remember who started the whole meme after Patrick Mahomes' rookie season that he was going to regress as a player. But what I got really upset about at the time is that I kept saying, now, what do you mean by regress? Because if you're talking about fantasy football, for example, if you're talking about statistically, just pure counting stats, well, after his first season as a starter, his second year in the league, when Mahomes threw for more than 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, well, it was easy to say, hey, well, he's going to regress from those numbers. But it's a different thing to say that Patrick Mahomes, as a football player, as a winning football player, as a skilled football player, it's harder to say he's going to get worse after having 1 year of experience because, well, actually, shouldn't this guy get better? And in fact, Mahomes has won 3 Super Bowls since then. But of course, statistically, he has passed 5,000 yards and in fact had a higher number of yards in 2022, although that is with one more regular season game. We're now in a 17-game schedule environment. But on the touchdowns, actually, Mahomes only has passed 40 touchdowns, also in that 2022 season, where he threw for 41. Just 27 touchdown passes for Mahomes last season. So If you think that Patrick Mahomes is now bad somehow, obviously no one thinks that. If you think Patrick Mahomes has gotten worse since 2018, for instance, I'm just telling you, as somebody who's seen all of the Kansas City Chiefs games in those times, I'm not seeing a whole lot of evidence for that being the case. And in fact, I think Patrick Mahomes has gotten better. Now, what does all of this have to do with Missouri, the Missouri Tigers, you're probably asking yourself? Well, Marquis Johnson, in a much smaller sample size, of course, Johnson only had actually 15 targets and 13 catches last season for Missouri. Well, he had some unbelievable statistics as well. And in fact, if you look at what Marquis Johnson did, for anybody who had at least double-digit targets, he was the SEC leader in a number of different categories. In particular, yards per catch, Marquis Johnson nearly 30 yards per catch. And yards per target. In other words, just, hey, every time you drop back to pass and throw Marquis Johnson the football, he averaged more than 25 yards per target. Think about that for a second. Every time you throw him the ball, he's covering a quarter of the field. So you might be saying to yourself, maybe Missouri should throw Marquis Johnson the football a little more. Well, I think Missouri's probably thinking exactly the same thing. But the point here is, if you're saying that Marquis Johnson is going to regress next season, well, if you mean statistically, well, yes, no kidding. That's the most obvious take of all time. Especially with more target volume, there's just absolutely no way that he can keep up 25 yards per target, for instance. If he could keep that up, that would mean that he was from another planet, possibly Krypton or something to that effect. Or he was bitten by a radioactive spider. Something bizarre like that to keep that up. So obviously Marquis Johnson is going to regress statistically, but it's very much my expectation that he is going to progress and get much better this season as a wide receiver. And the fact that he'll be able to probably more effectively run some more routes underneath the defense instead of everything just being a go route or a post route over the top, something to try to take the top off of the defense. Well, that's naturally going to mean that his yards per reception and target and all that stuff is going to go down somewhat. And in fact, it's probably going to go down by at least a factor of half. If you look at, for example, Theo Weiss and Luther Burden, for instance, well, they averaged about nearly 10 yards per target. So Luther Burden is almost getting a first down every time he catches the football. Hey, that's pretty freaking impressive, by the way. But there's no way that Marquis Johnson is 2.5 times better than Luther Burden is the point. But can he be absolutely a huge part of this offense this coming season? And in fact, a more important in some ways part of this offense? Yeah, I absolutely think he can, because at the very least, Marquis Johnson has shown value, as he did, of course, in the Cotton Bowl most recently, of taking the top off of defenses and making life easier for guys like Luther Burden and Theo Weiss. So once again, a lot of parts of this Missouri offense that I'm excited about. Really, Marquis Johnson is right up there with any of them. And I have to admit, when it comes to college football, I am a bit of a traditionalist, without a doubt. I am willing to embrace some change for sure, but just the amount of change the last few years has been hard to process in some ways. And I think part of that has been why I've pushed back to some extent against the 12-team college football playoff. But I have to say, now with the official schedule for the 24-25 playoff out there, you got to say, it is just banger after banger after banger after banger of football games. There is no question about that. But I do have to say, can we please stop at this point? Let's talk more about the college football playoff and also a non-conference schedule in basketball. A non-conference opponent, I should say, on the upcoming Missouri schedule is revealed as well. First, though, let's talk some FanDuel, because summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet on it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. Some interesting baseball on the docket today, including the St. Louis Cardinals' Miles Mikolas against the Pittsburgh Pirates' phenom Paul Skeens. Man, he is a fun pitcher to watch. The Cardinals slight underdogs at home, plus 114 if you want to get in on that action. The Royals also at home against the New York Yankees. Brady Singer against Marcus Stroman, the Royals, plus 118. But again, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. It's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. So on the Missouri basketball schedule for this coming season, well, you need some easy victories on the schedule, and the Tigers certainly found one in Pacific. And if you'll allow me for a minute, I just feel like doing South Park's version of the Peter Griffin voice. You think Mizzou was bad? Well, if you think Missouri basketball was bad, Pacific was really, really, really bad at 6-26 overall and winless in the WCC. So by any measure, one of the absolute worst Division I basketball teams last season, bottom 5 according to KenPom.com, for instance. Nevada was by far the best team on their non-conference schedule last year, with Cal being a distant second. Honestly, it's surprising to me that Pacific out there in Stockton, California, would be willing to travel this far to take what is hopefully a beatdown. My goodness, if we lose this game, just burn down the program at that point. But an interesting schedule for this particular game. Usually a team that's this bad, well, usually it'd be somebody like, Lindenwood, a team that's maybe just a couple hours away that can take a bus trip instead of, a multi-state venture of 1,000+ miles all the way from Stockton to Columbia. So an interesting game schedule there. I wish I knew kind of the behind-the-scenes machinations there, I got to be honest. And finally, on the college football playoff, again, for as much as I am a college football traditionalist, one of the problems with this sport and the tradition of it is, frankly, not enough marquee games, especially compared to other sports, especially compared to really the pro sports counterparts, especially the NFL playoff model. Well, you're getting marquee games and hugely watched games all the time, banger after banger after banger. And that's kind of what they're giving us now. Instead of 3 excellent games, which obviously is what, in theory, the college football playoff has been the last few seasons, you're getting 11 games. And I can't say, especially with the amount of attention and importance that has been obviously lessened on the other college football, the other bowl games, the traditional bowl games like the Cotton Bowl, an obvious example last season. So much talk of it being, well, how much did Ohio State really play its best team, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is there's going to be none of those excuses in this new format. Certainly, if anybody in the college football playoff now expanded out, well, the Cotton Bowl, the Rose Bowl game, the Sugar Bowl, the Peach Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, all 6 of these games are now co-opted by this system. They'll be in it every single year. So those 6 games, plus the national championship game, plus the 4 games on campus in the first round of the college football playoff, the teams that don't get a bye. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Just in terms of, as a sports watcher, going to get one game on Friday, December 20th, 3 on Saturday, the 21st. Then, of course, just you're going with that 1 and 3 format for the playoffs as well. it's just going to be an exciting bunch of television. Those two, the Wednesday on the 1st, New Year's Day is back. Also, that one more final Saturday, maybe one of the best Saturdays you can imagine, that triple header there of the first round. And then, of course, a triple header of the college football playoff, the quarterfinals on January 1st. Well, that's a pretty good schedule, I have to admit. First year with the Rose Bowl game being in its traditional time slot of 5 p.m. Eastern is a nice touch as well. We'll see how that goes in the future. But I have to say, looking at it all laid out like that, I am really excited for the 12-team playoff. Obviously, let's hope Missouri is part of it. Let's maybe keep it like this for a while and see how it goes instead of immediately expanding to 16 teams. I'd like to at least see it 1 year before we start doing that. But you know what? Thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou. Until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.